Joseph Goebbels rose to prominence in the Nazi Party during the 1920s and 30s, which ultimately resulted in his appointment as Nazi propaganda minister. With this leadership position and his control over every aspect of German media, he was able to infuse the Nazi ideology into the general populace, bending the minds of millions. Through his brilliant rhetorical fervor, propaganda films, and radio, Goebbels gained support for the Nazi Party and later furthered the war effort. His work left a legacy of the Nazi regime's rise to power, and his use of manipulative and aggressive propaganda is present in governments today. Joseph Goebbels was born October 29, 1897, in the small industrial town of Reit in western Germany. As a young boy, he had a bone marrow infection in his right leg that resulted in it being shorter than his left, and gave him a clubfoot, leaving him with a limp. This deformity prevented him from joining the German army in World War I, and gave him a feeling of intense early embitterment. After his youth, Goebbels then received numerous scholarships and went on to attend 8 different universities where he received degrees in communication and journalism. Although he was a gifted intellectual and rhetorically talented, his frustration with the lack of publication of his early writings left him feeling worthless. Much like a young Joseph Goebbels, Germany at this time was a struggling country without direction. In the aftermath of World War I, the Treaty of Versailles imposed harsh economic restrictions on Germany, along with taking away a large portion of former German territory. This had a great effect on the German psyche, as well as its economy, as it left the nation starving and dispirited, craving the former glory it had once known. The Nazi Party was a political force, steadily gaining power throughout the 1920s, appealing to the working class and focusing on the betterment of German society. The nationalist faction in the south was led by Adolf Hitler, and the socialist faction in the north was led by Gregor Strasser. These two competitive radicals were both fighting for control of the party as the Nazis were beginning to gain a real presence in the Reichstag, the legislative body in Germany. Strasser appointed Goebbels as his secretary because he recognized the talents of the young writer with fanatical nationalism. In February 1926, Hitler called a party meeting that was made up of mostly Nazis from the south who were against Strasser and Goebbels' socialist plans for the party. It was at this party meeting that Hitler realized Goebbels' talents and sought to bring him onto his side of the party, which he succeeded in doing. After Goebbels was swayed by Hitler, he wrote, "Adolf Hitler, I love you because you are both great and simple at the same time, what one calls a genius." It was at this point that Goebbels pledged absolute loyalty to the Führer and began his 14-year-long rise to infamy. Soon after this, in October 1926, Goebbels was made the Gauleiter, or Nazi Party leader, for the city of Berlin. This was the stronghold of the socialist and the communist factions of the German political scene, and this is where Goebbels began his work as a brilliant propagandist. Here he wrote various propaganda letters and pamphlets as editor of the Nazi paper Der Angriff, or The Attack. With this forum, he wrote provocative articles and produced a litany of Nazi propaganda posters and writings. In addition to his writings, he also became one of the best Nazi orators at this time. His cool, humorous, and sardonic style brought him great success in front of crowds, as did his ability to stir the crowd into a fury through his powerful ideas and sentiments. He did this by exploiting racist, xenophobic, and fanatical ideas. One example of his work in Berlin is how he manipulated the Berliners' attitude toward the Jews. At this time, Berlin had one of the largest Jewish populations in Germany. Goebbels used this, and the fact that a large portion of Jews had good jobs, to rally anti-Semitic feelings. This is particularly noticeable in the vicious and almost constant attacks that were made against the Jewish police chief Bernhard Weiss by Goebbels. The result of Goebbels' leadership in creating the anti-Semitic propaganda in Berlin was it helped put the Nazis in the national spotlight and garner them even greater support. Due to Goebbels' leadership in turning Berlin to a Nazi city, the Nazi Party had more representatives elected into the Reichstag, including Goebbels himself. This stronger political influence led to Adolf Hitler being elected as the Reich Chancellor of Germany in 1933. Hitler then made Goebbels the Minister of Propaganda. One of Goebbels' most important works of propaganda was his creation of the Hitler myth, or Führer cult. The Führer cult was created in 1932 to give Hitler dual images, one as a caring father, and the other as a German deity to be worshipped and followed. The cult of personality that Goebbels created around Hitler allowed the Nazis to flourish to an even greater extent. As the support for Hitler grew, Gregor Strasser left the party saying, "Whatever happens, mark what I say. From now on, Germany is in the hands of an Austrian who is a congenital liar and a clubfoot." and I tell you, the last is the worst of them all. This is Satan in human form. Goebbels played a major role in the expansion of the Nazi Party, but some of his most crucial work came before and during World War II. He used his position of Minister of Propaganda to manipulate how the war was presented and showed to the German people. Goebbels controlled all of the German press, choosing what information to show and how to use the information to the greatest effect possible. In the beginning of the war, Goebbels focused on the power of the German military machine and the extensive support the Nazis had throughout the Reich. The finest example of this type of nationalist propaganda in the early war is the film Triumph des Willens, or Triumph of the Will. In it, film of Nazi rallies, Nazi speakers, and the military were intermixed to portray the Nazi as the strong Aryan rulers of the present and future. Goebbels' work convinced many Germans to fully believe in the Nazis and their own preeminence. Through countless films similar to this style, such as Victory of the Faith and Day of Freedom, Our Armed Forces, the Ministry of Propaganda contributed to the overwhelming pro-war and pro-Nazi feelings in the German people. In addition to making the films, the Ministry of Propaganda promoted the wide distribution of films of this nature, which then implanted these ideas into the minds of the German people, young and old. Goebbels' greatest achievement in censorship was the Ministry of Propaganda's use of the radio. Being one of the first to fully harness the power of radio, he was able to restrict other radio channels getting through to their people. The radio was such a powerful propaganda weapon that by 1939, 11 hours of Nazi programming was broadcast across Europe per day. With the reach of Nazism expanded, more people outside of Germany were exposed to Hitler's speeches. Radio, along with film, had a major impact in creating an even larger Nazi party. As war was entering its final stages and the Nazis were beginning to get pinched in from all corners, Goebbels used his oratorical abilities to rally the Reich to its final sacrifice, total war. His Total War speech of 1943 called every German to give whatever they had to the war effort, and every aspect of social and economic life became centered around the complete militarization of Germany. Because of this speech and Goebbels' influence on the German populace, Germany fought until its cities were in ruin, its peoples broken, and its army completely obliterated. Goebbels and his family took their own lives in the Führer bunker, along with Hitler, as Berlin was crumbling under the Allied forces. Through his work, Joseph Goebbels established a legacy that can still be seen in the modern world. Goebbels was such a talented and aggressive propagandist that his name is used to describe deceitful propaganda. In 2014, Ephraim Snee, an ex-minister in Israel, accused the Israeli government of using Goebbelsian propaganda and brainwashing the Israeli people to believe that there is no peace partner in Palestine. Goebbels made such a profound impact in propaganda that his style of complete control of the press is used in many totalitarian governments today. A prominent example of this use of censorship is North Korea. Similar to Goebbels and the Nazi Party, the government of North Korea controls all media within the country and doesn't allow media from outside the country to reach its people. Radio and TV sets in North Korea are pre-tuned to government stations, and radios are checked by the police. Joseph Goebbels' legacy of propaganda and full censorship has grown geographically and lasted 60 years past his death. Goebbels went from being a disturbed clubfoot to being one of the most influential men in the world. He went from leading the spread of propaganda in Berlin to controlling the entirety of German media. His love for Adolf Hitler and his mastery of manipulation was a leading factor in the Nazi takeover of the government. As Hitler led Germany out of ruin, Goebbels persuaded Germany to follow Hitler. Through his nationalistic films, radio broadcasts, posters, and appeal to the lower and working classes, he was not only able to gain support for Hitler, but for the war as well. His promotion and success in achieving total war caused people to give everything they had for the war effort and showed his influence and leadership, even in the most destructive of ways. His fight for Nazi control and his powerful propaganda left a legacy of the Nazis' 12-year control of Germany and left a legacy of tactically hate-filled attack propaganda used to this day. As he eerily foreshadowed shortly before the war ended, if the day should ever come when we must go, if someday we are compelled to leave the scene of history, we will slam the door so hard that the universe will shake and mankind will stand back in stupefaction.